It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, mate, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 142, recorded on the 27th of January, the day after Australia Day. And we'll have a look at what took place around Australia Day shortly. Joining me, as usual, is Jack, all the way in Hong Kong. Hong Kong Jack, g'day, mate. How are you?
Good.
Let's start off with the coalition woes. Oh, well, there's no coalition anymore. Second time it's been thrown out. This one looks a little bit more enduring. It's unbelievable, really. I firstly want to ask you, Jack, is Anthony Albanese the Stephen Bradbury of Australian politics, or was there a little bit of mastery in what he did last week?
But I called him the Stephen Bradbury of politics a few weeks back because he keeps skating through just by staying on his feet, more or less, and he's done it again. Look, I think there might have been some Machiavellian cleverness in it, but those things only work if the other side fall into the trap, really, and they jumped in.
He would know that, wouldn't he? I mean, certainly around the racial vilification stuff. And we were at a bit of a loss last week when we were talking about how the Parliament was going to react. We didn't want to speculate. But the racial vilification stuff, that should have told someone like Anthony Albanese with his long experience in the Parliament. The 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act was something that almost tore the Libs apart when they looked to reform it themselves in government. So I think he would have had a pretty clear understanding. But let's just go back a little bit. Susan Ley calls for Parliament to resume an emergency sitting and then calls on the Prime Minister to create laws to deal with the poison of anti-Semitism, and then couldn't get it up, so to speak.
No. Well, the mistake was thinking that this was something that Parliament had to fix. I don't think it is. It's a great opportunity to do a bit of grandstanding, but that can come unstuck, and it did.
Well, what we have now, of course, is and this we couldn't cover last week. It was a little premature, but what we do have is the firearms reforms, firearms law reforms, and I think there was some overreach there, but also the hate group stuff, and Hizbut Tahrir and the NSN apparently long on the list. Now, what triggers that is an ASIO reference to the Minister for Home Affairs, and then the Minister for Home Affairs has absolute discretion on whether that group be banned. And there are some criminal elements in there, not least of all this kind of grooming of young people by hate preachers, regardless of their stripe. I don't have too many problems with that.
No, but all of these things rely on having good, sensible, intelligent people administering them. But yes, if that's the case, no.
This is true. And Canavan, who probably propelled the coalition break, was saying, oh, look, it was a sort of slippery slope argument, if you know what I mean. It was, look, what happens if, someone who's ex-Labor man is appointed to ASIO and then Home Affairs, they just want to get rid of the Country Women's Association or something like that. It was all a bit silly.
I mean, what in effect he's saying is, what happens if you don't have an intelligent, sensible people administering this, right?
Well, back of his mind, Jack, and back of the National Party's mind, is they would like to get stuck into a fair bit of anti-immigration rhetoric. And some of their cohorts and related associations might want to go a little bit further. And that's because they are feeling the hot breath of Pauline Hanson on their necks, Jack.
They are indeed.
Well, would it be hot? I don't know if it'd be hot.
They
tepid, possibly.
What's the Neville Rand saying? Always back self-interest. At least you know it's trying. A lot of them would be looking at their seats and saying, "Am I likely to be re-elected?"
Yeah, it's the gnats are in the gun, aren't they? With the National Party rise. We've talked about their polling. We don't believe, or I certainly don't. It's in that sort of high 20%, or that would be represented in an election. But it's probably in the high teens, I would think. And, of course, the Liberal Party, those votes are substantially sort of moving from the coalition. Tough times for centre-right parties around the world, Jack, as Simon Benson claims we are entering uncharted waters. We look at other analysts like Kosamaris who talk about this pincer movement. So the centre-right parties can go to the centre and they will essentially create a vacuum that will be filled by one nation. If they move further to the right, they lose the centre. It's almost like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Well, the answer to that's relatively simple, in my opinion. It's what all of the centre-left and the centre-right parties who've been successful do, is to have a much broader coalition than that, and to have within their ranks some people you wouldn't necessarily want to be seen in public with, right? So you think of the Great Labor Party in the 1980s. There was some complete Fruit Loops on the far left of that, but they existed within the party. So you kept that thing together. And to me, that's what the Conservative parties, whoever it is who ends up leading, has to do. It has to form a kind of a broad coalition that runs from a fair bit of the more sensible end of one nation right through to the wets in the inner city.
Well, the wets the problem is if you've got your small L Liberals are decidedly in the minority. They've essentially been wiped out in the last two federal elections. There's a handful of them around now.
Or
the
left.
wets, if you like. I mean, that's an economic term, but yeah, I know what you mean. You might call it progressive right. So there are not many of them left, and there still remain the sprinkling of nuts at the other end of it. So I don't know where they go from here. But of course, before dying, if that is indeed what's going to happen, there's going to be a spill. And the big question is now when. So Susan Ley stuck her chin out. Good on her. Stuck her chin out today and said, well, come at me, boys. Angus Fraser was interviewed this morning and said really nothing. That he didn't dismiss a spill motion where he would run as opposition leader. He didn't rule it out. He didn't rule it in. Andrew Hastie has been quiet. No one's quite sure what he is going to do. And there's a discussion there that there may be a spill as soon as next week, or as late as as late as the May budget sittings.
You would think that's where the history will take us. If it doesn't happen next week, they mightn't have the numbers yet, but they probably will by May. I was talking before about the need for whoever the Conservative Party is to form that broad-based coalition. It actually needs a bit of strength at the top, not just the leader, but the leadership generally is the only way you can carry all those people along with you. And I suspect if she survives next week, by May, someone will be having the conversation with Susan Lee that I think it was Gareth Evans had with Bob Hawke at the end of his prime ministership.
You
What did he say?
They're pissing on your swag?
The dogs are pissing on your swag, Bob. It's time to go,
Well, yeah. I mean, I suspect there's no real hurry to bring on a spill, and there's a great deal of uncertainty of where it might go. The first thing, the thing you said about Susan Ley, you often see Susan Ley speaking now, and there's no one behind her. So her deputy, Chad O'Brien, you've got to wonder what he's up to. Is he having 5 bob each way?
He doesn't like being a noddy.
Well, it just doesn't. It looks like she's a solitary figure. That's what it comes across as, and I guess it throws open, particularly if Hastie decides that he doesn't want the leadership at this particular point. It's very difficult to be a Western Australian politician, regardless of whether Labor, Liberal, Greens, whatever. And he's got a young family and those sorts of things. So he may knock that back, which would lead to a kind of crapshoot on who would be the next leader, and O'Brien would be one of them. I think even Tim Wilson might put his hand up. Those sorts. But when we're talking about progressive Liberals, he would be one.
You'd have gotten handy odds, 18 months ago on Tim Wilson being a potential leader, wouldn't you?
But if no clear successor emerges, and I'll go forward and I'll go on and say Angus Taylor, I think that would be a disaster. I think he's been found out. He was the man most likely when he entered the parliament, and he's been found out quite a bit since. If Hastie does fall over in the immediate future anyway, or not throw his hat in the ring, it could end up this sort of crapshoot. You just need to become a member of the Parliamentary Liberal Party. You never know. You could be leader of the opposition. Put your hand up at the wrong time and get the votes.
And look, you never know how these people are going to go really until they get in their job. There have been some unlikely people made leaders who turned out to be, Henry Bolte in Victoria, where he was meant to be a short-term stopgap, and ruled for 19 years or something,
I mean, these things do happen. I mean, one sort of people have sort of cast Albanese as the sort of last man standing type option, after Labor lost the unlosable in 2019.
Well, if you'd told his Parliament cabinet colleagues during the Gillard and Rudd governments that Albo was the future prime minister sitting amongst them, they'd have laughed at you.
Yeah, but at the same time, he's really developed a long experience as a parliamentarian. He's seen leaders come and go. He was part of the, more in sorrow about the Rudd Gillard years. Of course, he was a Rudd supporter, but you might remember a tearful speech he gave when Labor was in the middle of tearing themselves apart while in government. You would even go back to the Howard days, and I reckon he's learned a fair bit from John Howard too. That slow, cautious approach, largely, and a sort of innate sense of the mood of the nation. And I think that's something that he definitely shares with Howard. We've got some listener comments here from our beloved baseman, who just the one sentence from baseman was most unusual.
Hell, that's a surprise.
The unnationals, he's referring there to the National Party, the unnationals control the agenda with bugger all of the votes. I often refer to the Nationals as the 5%ers. So they get and that's indeed what they get in terms of the national vote share, around about that. I mean, obviously they don't run candidates in all electorates, only in the rural and regional ones, but it does seem to be, and it's been going on for a long time, that the cart is pulling the horse in the coalition.
It often seems like that. I hope someone fixes Baseman's keyboard, by the way. If you only type one sentence, there's something clearly wrong. It often seems like that. the coalition's been built all its life on the Country Party, then the National Party having a seemingly outsized say in what happens. Right?
Well, another regular listener, Lawrence, chipped in with, I guess, a reference to the National Party as a FON as a sort of Australian equivalent to the Reform movement. He writes, the Reform juggernaut seems to be flagging in part because of all the pollies defecting to it from the Tories that carry the baggage a decade of their party's failure. Does Barnaby create the same problem for FON? He was once called Australia's best retail politician. You've got to think the baggage he brings with him, like the drought envoy expenses scandal, Watergate, which was a reference not to the American political scandal, but to the Murray-Darling, and the drunken photo, who can forget that, of laying on the Canberra sidewalk talking on his phone, suggests he's a far cry from a centre political leadership, I guess is what Lawrence is talking about there. There's a bit of truth in that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I buy he was the best retail politician in Australia.
People used to say it all the time.
I never quite bought that, but he is very good, and he's very good with people. You put him in a crowd, he goes really well.
It's one of those things, Jack, that he would be may have a bit of a throng around him if he visited a rural or regional electorate, but you put him in the city and no one want to talk to him.
He's not national leadership material in my view, but he's very good at being very good in regional and rural Australia, because the secret sauce for this is he actually likes the people he's talking to.
Yeah, look, he is one of those hail fellow, well-met types, and I have met him myself. He's the sort of guy, I mean, when they talk about best retail politician, I would prefer to call him a public bar politician. Yeah. And there's a guy who can walk in and have a beer and a chat with people. That's not to say you have to agree with everything that he says or that he would agree with everything that I say, but he at least is cordial and carries with him a fair amount of decency. But yeah, I mean, he is poison in the cities, and but a breath of fresh air in rural and regional Australia, particularly New South Wales and Queensland.
When you said public bar politician, I wasn't expecting that, and my mind immediately went back to the 1970s of the great photos and video clips of both Gough Whitlam and Malcolm Fraser doing the public bar thing.
Neither comfortable.
They didn't look comfortable.
No. I do remember John Howard doing this. Oh, it must have been probably 2001, maybe 2004. And they've slipped him into a pub and he's got a schooner in front of him. Well, it's his shout. So, I mean, like most police, they don't carry any money.
Yeah.
He had to bite someone for a $5. That's how long ago it was.
There's a long funny story about a bloke from Warrnambool taking Barry Jones, who was then a rising star in the Victorian Labor Party, to a pub in Warrnambool. And
it's not his natural environment.
No, Bob Hawke always looked fine in one.
Yeah,
and Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott too.
Tony Abbott loves a beer. Yeah, necks him. Don't think he gets him down the throat as quickly as the late Bob Hawke. He had no gag reflex whatsoever, Bob. But
at least they looked like they belonged there, right?
Yeah,
they didn't. They didn't look like they'd been parroted in from outer space, which is what Gough and Malcolm Fraser looked like.
Yeah. All right, moving on now. Of course, it's the day after the Australia Day public holiday, 26th of January. I deal with a few issues there, but the Oz ran with this as its major headline for the day. The nation's social cohesion crisis has heightened after shocking displays of anti-Semitism, violence and extremist rhetoric on Australia Day, with a rudimentary explosive device thrown into a crowd. being treated as a potential mass casualty event. Neo-Nazi figures infiltrating rallies to declare the Jew, and I quote, the Jew is our greatest enemy, etc. Despite Anthony Albanese's pleas for national unity in the wake of the Bondi massacre, tens of thousands of Invasion Day protesters marched through Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Perth with opposing anti-immigration rallies drawing known white nationalists and neo-Nazis, prompting a major police response and several arrests. We'll go to Perth because that's quite alarming. There was a 31-year-old man arrested who is currently assisting police with their inquiries after he hurled from an upper level a rudimentary explosive device into this sort of crowd of protesters who were waiting there in Forest Place, which is a common meeting place in the heart of Perth CBD, and they were part of an Invasion Day rally. And police had to very quickly remove that crowd. The device that was located contained ball bearings, contained screws, and those items were wrapped around an unknown, at this stage, liquid in a glass container, subsequently described as the size of a medium-sized coffee cup. The individual, as far as we know, when we began recording, hasn't been charged yet. Police are searching his home. It does sound terrible, Jack. That is a potential mass killing event. We're a little in the dark as to what the actual intention was, and who this fellow. He's showing into an Invasion Day crowd. I would think the motives are fairly clear, but we don't know. That hasn't been confirmed yet either.
No.
So we'll wait more information, but that is, potentially very, very, very nasty. I mean, you did have a large crowd there. Police did pretty well. There was a sort of sense of panic. No one really knew what was going on, so they were just being ushered out. They were told to move and then stop so there wouldn't be a sort of chaotic movement of people. But no one was really told why until a little bit later. Could have been extremely nasty. In Melbourne, there were clashes between an MFA and Invasion Day rally. March for Australia is the MFA acronym, or the acronym MFA is March for Australia. Pretty paltry sort of attendance from that group, about 220 in Melbourne. Did see the numbers. Someone showed me a photo of a MFA rally in Adelaide, and seriously, there were more coppers than there were ralliers. But in the one in Melbourne, there seems to be, and it was hard to know who was assaulting who, but two people set upon one protester, and police are, I believe, chasing them up. And there were some arrests made and possibly some assault charges. In Sydney, the MFA rally ended at Moore Park. They started at Central Station, wound their way around through to Moore Park, through Surrey Hills, Jack. And they had about 2,000. The Invasion Day rally figures are a little bit sketchy, but somewhere around 10,000. But they didn't actually meet. The MFA rally ended at Moore Park, where they had a dais set up, and they've done this before. They have an open mic session of people who can just come in and have their say. Now, this guy was chosen because I can only assume because he was wearing an Irish Celtic cross on his T-shirt, which is sometimes a euphemistic symbol for Nazism. He got up and I won't even quote it, but it was just a terrible, terrible anti-Semitic rant. And then he left the rally and then was subsequently arrested in Burke Street, Darlinghurst.
Yeah.
Now, he's been charged, Jack, we believe. He's been charged with Section 93Z of the Crimes Act, which criminalises the act of publicly threatening or inciting violence against individuals or groups based on specific protected characteristics. I'll just run through it very quickly and I'll get your opinion. To be guilty under this section, a person must meet the following criteria: public act, tick. I don't think we need to look any more at that. Intent or recklessness. The offender must either intentionally mean to threaten, incite violence, or be reckless as to whether their act would do so. The act must be targeted at a person or group because of their race, religious belief or affiliation, sexual orientation, gender identity, intersex status, HIV or AIDS status. And the penalties for individuals include a maximum penalty of 3 years imprisonment and a fine of $11,000 or both. Have you heard the speech or heard at least an extract of it?
I've read what I believe is an extract of it.
Obvious,
I think
right?
It probably fits. Yes,
It would seem to fit. Here's what I think will happen before the court proceedings begin, Jack. This guy will have set himself up as a bit of a hero of the extreme right, National Socialist Network, if they want to call them that, if they're still allowed to be called that in a month or so's time. And, the crowdfunding will start and he'll be a bit of a hero. That you can actually take that to the bank. But beyond that, Jack, well, if he's found guilty, I can't see why that 3 years of imprisonment shouldn't be applied.
I would be reluctant to predict what's going to happen with that. Apart from that, I think you're right. Anybody in those situations, and it's just not a left or right thing, they tend to become the hero of the extreme end of their organisation.
I speculate that those are entirely his motives, to make a name for himself.
Yes.
I haven't seen this fellow named, but I do know that he is not, he's certainly not a prominent member of the neo-Nazi groups around the country. So he's weighed in, and
people like to think of themselves as being, I'm the martyr, I'm the man who'll stand against.
Exactly. He's going to martyrise himself, and hopefully pick up some crowdfund bickies along the way.
When I say people like to do that, most people are too sensible for that, but you get a number of people who want to do that.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I know what you mean. But that I'm speculating, but I believe that those were his motives. Yeah, and given the current environment, I can't see, if found guilty, how he could avoid a custodial sentence.
Yes.
But we shall see, and we will follow up on all of that. Unfortunately, there will be in fact, a lot of the signs at that MFA rally in Sydney, Jack, were Free Joel Davis, who's currently incarcerated, awaiting trial for making specific threats to Allegra Spender, the independent MP for Wentworth. So there was already that sense of martyrising going on. Jack, I only just learnt this, but Australia Day clashes with India's Republic Day.
Oh, yes, I've known that for 20 years, I think.
I did not know this.
Yeah.
And look...
I think they copied us.
Well, they came after us. There's definitely that.
The Brits were in India a long time before 1788. But
look, the history of Australia Day is that the states and the feds got together and came up with that date in the 30s. I need to look for a specific date. But it was not until
India as a nation didn't exist in any formal sense at that stage.
So we beat them there, but it was not a public holiday until 1995. It was gazetted as a public holiday during the Keating administration. Keating government, I should say.
I mean, to be fair, Australia Day as a concept didn't really take off until bicentennial year in 1988.
Yes, we won't go into those stories again, Jack. I've got eyewitnesses who were with you that day, and so be careful. You were heavily refreshed, I think, is the remark. But anyway, well, let me ask you, and it's a no-brainer: which national holiday or public holiday got the most global news coverage, Jack? Ours or India's?
Oh, I don't know. India has a huge military parade and all that kind of stuff. I suppose
It
they
was a
did.
huge military parade, over 10,000 invited guests, Jack. President of the European Council, European Commission chief, rocking and rolling the missiles on the backs of trucks and tanks and what have you. Global leaders from around the world sent their congratulations, including from President Donald Trump and President Xi. And it did seem to dwarf our Australia Day, Jack. And maybe this is another reason to change the date.
I just think that's a difference in the cultures. It's never been the Aussie way. I can't remember a big military parade in Australia ever.
Oh, it never happened.
No.
But it'd look a bit, it'll look a bit as your father anyway,
Yeah.
Well, squeaky wheels of trucks and...
Yeah, we wouldn't be comfortable with that.
No, and that's the other thing.
That's a cultural thing. That's partly a cultural thing. No?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think my view on the Australia Day and the date and all that sort of stuff is that I think it was kind of a bit lovely that we as a nation had this kind of split over it. But I think it's getting a bit out of control now, and I think as people view Australia Day now, the vast majority of people who view Australia, or the 26th of January, see it as a public holiday, and that's about it. And maybe we need to do a little bit more about nation building and or just commemorating the birth of our nation. There's much to be proud of in Australia. Unfortunately, our day of nationhood is, and you think the bloody founding fathers would have known this. 1 January, well, it's a holiday anyway. Why can't they just put it off for a couple of days, Jack? Or maybe even the second. We get the long weekend, a longer weekend. But yeah, I mean, that's our day of nationhood. Obviously, India celebrated its 77th republic, or 77th anniversary of being created a republic, 1950. So 1949, is it? Yes. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a strong belief about changing the date, but perhaps we just throw it open to some of our listeners to hear their thoughts. Is it just another public holiday for people in Australia, or is there a better solution? Because we do need to celebrate who we are as a country, because it's a bloody good country and we've done extremely well.
I'm a long way from it, but it seems to me to work all right, to be quite honest.
There's not. I mean, look, we did see the MFA guys. I mean, they're all flag shaggers, and then we had the Invasion Day protests, which are much more heavily populated, but still their numbers aren't growing. There were 10,000 there yesterday, and there were 10,000 the year before. I think there was a little bit of a spike in the The Voice referendum, but generally speaking, those numbers have been the same.
Yes.
And everyone else, I think, just sort of goes out of their way to avoid it and just enjoy the day off.
Well, a lot of people get along. A lot of the local government places are used to, and some of them still do.
Yeah, no, they most certainly do. There's citizenship ceremonies,
yes, etc.
Like yeah, I know a number of people who basically go out and speak at these things.
As do I, who are what they call Australia Day ambassadors. Yes,
yeah. Judy Nunn and Bruce Venables, husband and wife team, they've been doing it for a long time. I think Warren Brown does it as well, or has done it. Look, that'll be a good place to go and feel a bit of fervour. But I just think we're maybe dudding ourselves on not hollow patriotism, but a sense of pride on what this country's achieved.
Yeah, I know a couple of little country towns that I lived in have Australia Day ceremonies early in the morning. Then people go off and play sport or go to the pub or whatever. But they have a little something. To say. Yeah,
I think we can do a little bit better. But anyway, look forward to our listeners weighing in with their thoughts on that. Over in the United States, Jack, Minneapolis, the shooting of ICU nurse Alex Pretty has really brought an intense heat into US domestic politics. The new details have emerged. Federal officials have declined to provide critical details supporting their claim. The agent shot Pretty in self-defense. I think you and I, we've all seen the videos. Our listeners will have as well. It would seem to me that the one that I thought was damning was, obviously he was carrying a sidearm. There's no indication from the video that he had drawn that sidearm out and was brandishing it. It's a bit of a word that we've got used to over the last 48 hours. And that actually weapon was seized from him, taken from his person, and you count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and then the shooting starts. So he'd actually been what looks to be disarmed, and then they shot him. Now, the immediate response from the administration, including from Donald Trump on his Truth Socials, was to say that this guy was planning a massacre of ICE agents. That really hasn't stood, and people look at the video and say, well, where's your evidence? Trump went on to blame Democrat officials or Democrat policies. Since then, there seems to have been a bit of a change, Jack. I think a lot of people were talking about the Insurrection Act and would it be invoked, I should say. But I think some of the response to this is so sort of, coming from across the board means that President Trump's probably going to try and hose it down a little bit.
That's what it looks like to me. I think some of the officials just jumped out very quickly with great certainty as to what had happened, and that never looks all that smart to me. And they were barrackers. They weren't looking at what actually happened. They were barracking for what they saw as their side.
So thanks for your patience. We did notice a few little technical problems, a bit of construction noise at Hong Kong Jack's place. So we just held up for a little while for that to stop. In the meantime, getting back now to our Australia Day protests and so forth, there is some breaking news. Brandon Cashel, Koschel, he's the 31-year-old arrested in Sydney yesterday for an alleged hate crime. He is known to be a member of the National Socialist Network. He applied for bail this morning, but that was withheld. So that's just a little bit that we know. The court heard that Mr. Cashel had a violent matter on his record from 2017, but otherwise a limited criminal history. And goes on to say how he was arrested and how people were booing him on the streets of Surrey Hills or Darlinghurst. God bless him, Jack.
Unsurprising.
Moving back to the Minneapolis outrage, it would seem that perhaps the heat has gone out of it a little bit. We know that the governor of Minnesota, Governor Walz, and President Trump have spoken. Trump said of that conversation that they appeared to be on the same wavelength. Tom Homan, the head of the DHS, has been summoned to attend Minneapolis, and many GOP reps have contacted the POTUS unhappy with the situation. Border Patrol
a little bit further than that. The Border Patrol commander who was in charge there.
I was just going to say, Greg Bovino, he's been stood
removed.
down.
Yep, removed. And Tom Homan will not be reporting to Kristi Noem as he has been.
That's interesting.
He will be reporting directly to the president.
I see.
And it seems there was plenty of reliably sourced information that he and Noem had been at loggerheads to some degree about the way the border patrol operations should go, and certainly some on the Republican side seemed to be suggesting that she was kind of keen on all of this, keen on the protest, keen on the confrontation, and Homan is not.
Even if you're a MAGA guy, Jack, you would look at this and say, well, there's the First, Second, and Fourth Amendments have just been tossed out. Even in the event of the Insurrection Act being invoked, the law is very clear that the US Constitution remains in place as the guide on how law enforcement must operate under those circumstances. Yes. This is the sort of thing that gives rise to militias if it were happening to the right. So you would imagine that there is fairly broad distaste for all of this stuff across the political divide. There was a Snap YouGov poll which found that 46% of respondents want ICE disbanded, 41% opposed. I think we are starting to look at Kristi Noem being thrown under the bus.
Yes, quite possibly. I mean, she doesn't seem overburdened with political judgment, does she?
Yeah, no, she certainly doesn't. I was reminded of her book, Jack, No Going Back, which she released in 2024, when it was considered that she was a prospective candidate as a vice presidential nominee alongside Donald Trump, and of course the headline from that book was that she shot her dog. There's another even more intriguing business there, that she claimed she upbraided Kim Jong-un during a state visit. And there is just no evidence that she ever met Kim Jong-un. So there's 4 or 5 pages of a book that are just, an autobiography, not written by her, I think we can honestly say, but it was just completely fabricated.
Was there a Kim Jong-un state visit? I don't recall one.
Well, she claims that she met it. She was actually asked about this, and it was some time ago, and I actually saw the clip just yesterday. And she said, I'm not going to go into discussions that I have with leaders, political leaders around the world. I'm not going to go, hang on, don't say you can't discuss it. You actually wrote about it. And apparently Kim Jong-un looked at her and underestimated her. And she fired back, gave him a bit of a spray. That's in the book. Never met him. Never met the man.
Yeah.
So a fantasist and a pathological liar.
Yes.
The other thing about her, Jack, is she's not really one of the Trump admin. She's not rich. She's not independently wealthy, although she's done her best. I believe there's $250 million set aside for her husband's company to run advertising for ICE. So she's trying to get rich. Yeah. But they would see that, the Trump folk would see that as she's just a bit of a try-hard. So I think that's where we're headed. I think that's honestly where we're headed. I think she may be the first member of Trump's cabinet to get the flick. We shall see.
Homan is... he's not sort of popular. He comes across as a tough, hard cop, doesn't he?
Well, there was the 50 large that no one's quite sure whatever happened to, in terms of receiving a bribe to allow people through the immigration process in the United States.
But he has got a long and relatively distinguished career doing this for various presidents. I mean, President Obama gave him a medal, distinguished service type medal.
I think the most telling thing at this point is that Greg Bovino has been gone.
It's gone.
He's gone.
Yeah.
He really was incendiary on the video that I've seen, look, it's an appalling situation.
The believable gossip is that there were 2 different approaches to these deportations. One was the sort of Noem Bavino camp, and the other one is the Homan camp. And she, because she was the cabinet minister,
she made the decision.
Had more authority than was good for her, probably. And I'd be very surprised if she survives long as a cabinet minister.
Well, using children as bait to capture people who may or may not be illegal. We know there've been a hell of a lot of American citizens who've been locked up. We know now that 2 have been shot dead by ICE agents. There's some really bad stuff going on there. I remember the first shooting where the woman was not yet deceased, and there was a physician, a doctor, to one side who said, "Let me go in and help." And they said, "No. You will have to wait until," and they waited another 15 minutes before an ICE medical crew came in, and by then it was too late. I mean, just from a point of view of compensation, I mean, the US government is looking at paying millions and millions of dollars in compo. That's perhaps the less or the trivial part of this, but they will be forced to make considerable payments. And what happens with those ICE agents who have? I mean, this one guy just executed a person who was being held down on the ground. Another one claimed he was run over when he was seen walking around. There was talk that there was actually it didn't get widespread media coverage, which made me a little bit sceptical. But there's an Irish fellow living in the Netherlands who claims that he had received a list of the 4,500 ICE agents supplied to him by a whistleblower. And like I said, a little bit sceptical about it because he said, and we haven't heard much about it, except there's been, again, a social media claim that Henry Torres, former leader of the Proud Boys, is an ICE agent. Again, that's not confirmed. But when we look at some of these ICE agents and the backgrounds of those we do know, it's kind of like they're failed police officers. They've been let loose or they've been cut loose because they've had discipline issues, those sorts of things. So it's kind of the flotsam and jetsam of US law enforcement that make up a lot of the agents. So I think that's where we're going to go. I mean, I think some of the conspiratorial people were thinking about Insurrection Act, that Trump would sort of provoke the matter. But it would seem that the level of outrage in the United States is such that they're sort of backing away, and they'll make Kristi Noem the fall guy for it.
Interesting that Trump said that he and Waltz were more or less on the same page about this, because there is a sort of an underlying dispute, I suppose. Not just in Minneapolis or Minnesota, but the sanctuary city idea that hasn't really been tested in the courts since 2012. I think the Obama government took on the Arizona state government, who they wanted to run. The Arizona government wanted to run. They wanted to enforce the federal immigration laws the way they thought they should have been enforced, and not the way that the Obama government was enforcing them. And the court, in the end, said no.
It's a federal responsibility.
Yeah, it's a federal responsibility. So where that bumps up against the sanctuary cities idea, I don't know. But
the other interesting thing, Jack, is in the immediate aftermath of the second ICE killing in Minneapolis, Alex Pretty being shot dead by ICE agents. The first response came from Pam Bondi. Did you see this? It was a letter signed by her.
No, I didn't say that.
And this was addressed to Waltz, claiming, look, we'll pull our ICE agents out if you give us your electoral records.
No, I didn't say that.
Yeah, well, certainly it's signed by her. She's got she's got a signature, looks like, like a year or a kindergarten sort of scrawl. It's quite noticeable. And that sounded really ominous. And you're going to say, well, why do you want that? All right. Greenland. Much ado about.
I can't take her quite seriously because I always think she's Pam Bondi.
Yeah, I know. It's always it's the first thing you want to say.
That's because I'm a shallow person.
Occasionally, you get the look in her eyes, thinking, "Yeah, I'm going to go to jail for this." But Greenland, Jack, much ado about nothing, it would seem. And was that due? I must say, I mean, we do. Donald Trump had a long, sprawling speech at Davos. Got to say, first off, Cookers thought Davos was the height of all evil. A lot of MAGA people too. The Davos was the Rothschilds writ large and all this sort of stuff, conspiracy theories, and then basically all the world leaders turned up in the last one, including Donald Trump, who made a sprawling speech, as I say. And in the end said, look, if you're not going to give Greenland to me, well, we'll just sort of let it go. Now they're saying there's a deal in place, but everyone outside of Donald Trump doesn't know what that means. The Danes certainly don't. What are we talking about here, Jack? Is it just further market manipulation? We need to give some context to that, but you go ahead.
No, I just think he wanted something, and he tried to get it, and he did it the same way he's been doing it in politics since 2016. He behaves like a property developer. He bungs on a blue. The world's going to end, etc., unless you give me what I want, and then he takes whatever deal comes along.
Yeah, but on the basis of the tariffs that were going to be applied to a range of European nations, including the Danes, the UK, France, Germany, etc., that dropped the market. And then when he, after he finished his Davos speech and declaring that the tariffs would not be applied, market shot up again.
Yeah. Ted Cruz had a conversation with him last week.
Yeah, I think it was recorded, wasn't it?
Yeah, in which, this is Senator Cruz from Texas, in which he said if people's 401ks, that's their retirement accounts, read superannuation, if you like, in Australian terms. If they're in the toilet and inflation is really bad by the middle of the year, by June, July, August, it's going to be a bloodbath at the midterms. We might even lose the Senate as well. And if that happens, you'll be impeached every 3 weeks until you leave office.
You'll be impeached. You'll be impeached and convicted. Yeah.
And apparently, the president was. What do they say in America? He cussed or something like that. I think Ted might have got.
Not be aware of this. I mean, we've got a story to tell about Japan because there was a rush on Japanese bond markets last week, too, which actually precipitated a shift in the US bond market. And what governments don't want to see is the value of those bonds go up because that increases debt, etc. Now, there was a story that $100 million had come from a Danish superannuation company, $100 million worth of US bonds, which they sold, and that most certainly happened. But $100 million worth of US bonds is probably not going. I think I said billion first. $100 million worth of US bonds is not going to affect it that much. But a lot of the debt is carried by Japan and China in the form of US bonds, Jack. And the EU holds a considerable position in US debt as well. And while it would be a case of cutting off your nose to spite your face, I mean, there is a real vulnerability there. The other one is, too, of course, this sort of interference with the Fed, this attempt to drive interest rates down no matter what the inflationary climate is. Now, the Turkish president, Erdogan, thought this was a terrific idea. He just became obsessed. Lower interest rates means everything's going to be beautiful. But in an inflationary environment, it just can superheat things, and the Turks ended up with an inflation rate of 80%, and he finally saw some sense. We're in a sort of similar sort of area now with the Fed and the Trump administration, but Greenland. It was always one of those things, wasn't it? You thought, well, nothing's going to happen here, and really, it turned out just like that. But in the meantime, Jack, we've got real concerns, and we may as well move straight on to the Mark Carney speech there, which is the standout speech of the Davos conference. And it was a speech. Look, he's actually a very intelligent fellow and a very good speaker. And the speech was essentially, we're now living in a geopolitical environment where there are no rules.
Yes. Yeah, that's essentially what he said. Yeah.
Now, he's coming to Australia in March, and I would imagine, without checking the parliamentary sitting days, I would imagine he would address a joint sitting of the Australian Parliament.
Seems to be the fashion these days.
Impressive guy.
I think what he's saying is that that the post-World War II international rules-based order, as it's called, all this international law stuff, doesn't really hold anymore. And I don't think it ever did. I think a lot of the stuff that's described as international law was a figment of some lawyers' imaginations, right? It never really worked on the ground, and now it's what's happened is the curtain's been pulled away and everybody else can see it.
Yeah, except to say I don't think we've seen such a blatant assault on certainly from the United States before on international law. Yes, you could always say that perhaps JFK and Eisenhower and others overtly looked like they were playing by the rules and promoting democracy and so, but of course, the Black Ops guys were going about things in a completely different way.
Yeah, and the non-Western powers have never taken, but they pay lip service to the international laws, but have never obeyed them at all.
Well, while we're speaking of this, Jack, Trump, I mean, the foot's never far away from the mouth. Not that he seems to be bothered by it, but he has been sticking with this line that Article 5 Article 5, isn't it, of the NATO treaty has never been invoked, but it was only invoked once, and that was by the United States in around 9/11.
Yeah,
and that led to, and so he finally corrected himself, and he said, well, the US was there, and all these other guys were just sort of hanging around, out of trouble. And that upset so many people around the world. So many world leaders felt obliged to speak. Albo didn't in Australia, but the Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister did weigh in what I would describe as an obtuse criticism of Donald Trump. But
people talk about his political skills. He managed to unite the whole United Kingdom.
Yeah, indeed. Well,
against him.
I mean, you can understand it's a sore point, though, Jack. I mean,
yes, of
the
course.
number of military deaths in Afghanistan in 20 years. The United States, 2,461. The United Kingdom, 457, is a fairly significant number. Canada, 158. France, 90. Germany, 60. Italy, 48. Denmark, 43. Australia, 41. Poland, 40. And Spain 34. Those are, and there's a sort of collective group of others at 185. So these are significant contributions, and of course these deaths will be very, very raw with the families.
Yeah, if you run those numbers, it doesn't. There's not that many Danes, but Denmark's a small country. There's 300 million Americans, so it was proportionally very, very high. It's a really dumb thing to say.
he just does it all the time, Jack. But it's rare that he faces consequences, and I think that was one moment. I mean, look, the guy's as cunning as a shithouse rat. We know that. But when it comes to what we might call intellectual breadth, there's just nothing there. I mean, he wouldn't have read a book about Afghanistan. He has a perception about Afghanistan that it was really just the Americans there and everyone else was, filling the petrol tanks and pumping up the tyres. Because that's just his perception of it. And off he goes speaking like that. So I think probably more to the point than upsetting governments, he upset people in Europe who, none of them are fans of Trump's anyway, and in the UK, we do see these banner ads that run around bus stops. There's a campaign going around there. Have you seen some of the ads?
No.
He goes, there's one where he's just got his arm around Epstein, just going, "You'll always be a nonce." And that's a bit of a campaign. So not well loved, but this is just inflammatory stuff. And there's always this sort of sense that he could go too far and put peace at risk across the board. So Carney's speech was well received, and Davos wasn't just a big cooker thing. Jack, it was actually probably the biggest sort of world forum they've had there in terms of leadership, certainly from the West.
Yes, I didn't think that Carney's was the most consequential speech. He just set out what he thought was happening. The most consequential speech was from the German Chancellor, who gave an honest assessment of what is happening, and what the failures of the EU have been, and what they need to do in the new world, what they need to do to thrive in the new world. That was much more consequential, and he's sort of in lockstep with the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni about this as well.
Yeah, and it's a perfect case. We'll mention Brexit briefly, but this is how you fix the EU, Jack. You can't do it from the outside. You've got to do it from the inside.
This is this Humphrey approach to the EU, from yes Prime Minister. He said we don't want to be on the outside. He said we want to be on the inside to make a complete pig's breakfast of the whole thing.
Well, that may be so, but really, yes, no one would describe the EU as a perfect organisation, and Chancellor Merz's criticisms were about the level of bureaucracy around the EU, which has been one of the common criticisms. Sometimes sort of falsely applied, but generally speaking, there's just too many rules for example, farmers have to follow. So
it's not competitive. Is the answer? It's an anti-competitive organisation, and it was set up as a free trade group, so it was meant to be competitive. But it has long since moved on. It's been captured by the bureaucracy, and that's what the point Merz was making. We are the world champions at regulation, he said.
Yeah, and so there's a need for reform. But you can't reform something if you're not part of it. And this is the largest trading bloc in the world by collective GDP. And there is something to be said, that there is something that says you need to maintain this. Spain on its own will always have economic problems. We'll always have trade issues, particularly in the sort of environment we're in now, just as an example. But collectively, as part of Europe, they pack a punch. So it's about changing this from the inside. I mean, we go on with Brexit. I did give you a little bit of homework, which we haven't done, which I don't think you've done. But I mean, this stuff is, this is in the Parliamentary Budget Office, the sort of stats that I mentioned before. And it's really been an absolute disaster for England. UK budget, the UK Office of Budget Responsibility talks about, and let me just quickly quote you here. A loss of investment at 17%. Right. This is what they forecast as saying this is where we should have been, or what they call had we remained, as opposed to where we are now. You've got a savage cut in investment to the point where British money is investing offshore rather than in England. These are all forecast figures from last year that were updated on the 30th of July. So,
what's your time frame? Is it 2016 or 2020?
Well, it's 2025. It's 2026 now.
But what's your starting point? Are you saying that the loss was from 2016 when the vote was, or 2020 when
it doesn't matter what I say. This was since the referendum in June 2016. This is the Office for Budget Responsibility in the UK. The OBR has conducted a range of analysis on the economic and fiscal implications of EU exit. This section sets out a summary of analysis. On our November 2016 forecast incorporated initial estimates of the effect that the vote to leave the EU would have on the economy and public finances. We incorporated a series of broad brush assumptions about the economic and fiscal impact of Brexit that would be consistent with a variety of future trading relationships, given the absence of a meaningful basis upon which to predict the precise outcome of the negotiations.
Can I just say something there?
Yeah.
In 2016, after the vote, it was not possible to predict how this would pan out because no details of how Brexit was going to take place had been worked out at all. In fact, none of the laws changed until January 2020. We're coming up till almost exactly 6 years since Brexit actually took place.
Yes. So in the space of that time,
in the 6 years.
Brexit has had a large and persistent effect on the UK economy. By 2025, we estimate that UK GDP per capita was 6 to 8% lower than it would have been without Brexit. Investment was 12 to 18% lower, employment 3 to 4% lower, and productivity 3 to 4% lower. These losses emerged.
Can I make a comment about that?
Let me finish. These losses emerged gradually. The impact was hard to see in 2017, 2018, but accumulated steadily over the subsequent decade as uncertainty persisted, trade barriers rose, and firms diverted resources away from productive activity. Economists were roughly right on the magnitude of the impact, but wrong on the timing. The consensus pre-referendum forecast of a 4% long-run GDP loss turned out to be close to the actual loss after 5 years, but too optimistic about the longer run. So there you go. So we're going up to 2021, right? That's a 4%. That's about right. 4% loss in GDP, and now we're seeing that sort of double since.
They say 6 to 8%. The actual figures, the actual GDP growth figures, put the UK a couple of percentage points lower than the average of the EU. Right? If they say they lost 6 to 8% of what it would have been without Brexit, then that they must have thought that Boris Johnson, Theresa May, Liz Truss, etc., were terrific economic managers, and I don't see the evidence for that, because what they're saying is the UK would have outperformed the EU, and it wouldn't have.
Why?
So I don't think their figures are right. In any event,
okay. What's the GDP growth rate in Spain right now? What's GDP rate? 20 at the conclusion of 2025. So it's 2%. It's 2.2%.
Yes.
Right? You got France.
It's the outlier.
France about 1. You got Germany about 1. You got the UK at 1. What these people are saying is that over the period of this, so we're talking about 4% between 2016 and 2021. So that's almost a percentage point lost in GDP. They are saying that UK's GDP would have grown at around 2, but instead it's spluttered along at 1. The projection for last year was 1.5. By the way, they underachieved to the point where it's just 1.0.
Yeah, that's an opinion, not a fact, by the way.
It's not.
Well, because
These
you can't
things
measure
are kind of accepted. You really got to read about this. I'm actually a bit surprised that you haven't. I know you cheered it on, and we could say, all right, maybe you're in the thrall of shysters like Johnson and Farage. I mean, lots of people were. It's not nothing. Nothing to admit that you were just one of them. The simple fact of the matter is, you are looking at an economy in the UK that has profound impact going forward next 5 to 10 years. Where does it change, Jack? How does it change? How do you get productivity into that economy? How do you get growth into that economy? How do you get investment into that economy when Britain's own money is investing overseas?
Yeah, no. Well, I'm not going to agree, and if we're going to turn it into a struggle session, I'd rather go to the gulag.
It's not a struggle session. You cheered it on, but you haven't bothered to look at the economic impact thereafter.
I have.
I can go a little bit harder if you like, and ask you what you imagine, because you haven't bothered to read it. What you imagine the poverty rate is in the UK? Any idea?
I
take
don't.
A stab in the dark. It's at 21%. 10 years ago, it was at 14%. And that 21% figure means one in five people in the UK are in poverty now, including 33%. 1 in 3 children in the UK are living in poverty. And those figures, now there's lots of other reasons. It's not just Brexit, but Brexit is a significant contributor to this.
There are a lot of reasons for it. Okay,
lots of reasons for it.
You've had your say. I don't agree.
No. This is something you need to get around. If you think these things are just economic,
am I supposed to do a struggle session and confess my sins?
If you think this is,
I just don't agree with you.
It doesn't matter whether you agree. It's what the data says, Jack. And if the Office of Budget Responsibility makes these claims, along with most economists in the world. I mean, I'll give you one little homework assignment. You find me one piece of economic data that says that Brexit has actually contributed to a better economy, a better economic output in the UK. Find one.
I don't think it has. I just don't think it's been as anywhere near as bad as you say it is. But that's just me. That's my opinion. These are things that people can disagree about. They are opinions based upon estimates of what we think cause problems. Right? No one. You can't measure these
data.
like a piece
You're
of string.
You're entitled to have your opinion, but I'm entitled to say, here's the data. Here's the economic data.
Yes, but what you can't say is, and I know for sure what caused that. I don't think you can.
What we're seeing, what we will continue to see. That's the other thing. So find me one piece of economic data that says that Brexit has been a positive in terms of the UK's.
No, I've just told you I don't think that exists. I don't think it has been a positive.
We're not even going to get into the social and cultural issues, but just economic. Yeah, it doesn't exist, and you want to know why it doesn't exist? Because it's a fallacy. It's a fallacy that the UK will be better off. They were sold down. The people of the UK were sold down the river by a couple of shysters in Farage and Johnson, backed up with a lot of big money and black Russian money. That was what happened. It was a con job.
And the people had their choice and they voted, right? Now,
and they were conned.
You can say that. That's fine.
Yeah. And they were conned because they have dealt themselves a hand now from which there is really no escape. This stuff is not just the last 10 years. This is going to be the next 10 and the 10 after that. Low growth, massive cuts to investment, foreign and domestic, massive blows to employment, incremental increases in poverty rates throughout the UK. That's what's happened, and that's what's going to continue to happen because now they can't undo this. They can't untie this all now. It is their future. So do some reading. Find me one positive aspect. I heard a Brexiteer on UK radio. I was listening to them, and he said, "Oh, the first thing is, we don't have to pay the 15 billion euro to be part of the EU." And okay, well, what else has happened? And the trade loss in particular is $100 billion a year. 100 billion pounds a year. So there you go. I'm happy to have this argument anytime, anywhere. But it's not about opinions from my point of view. It's about hard data. Moving on. Iran. US President Donald Trump says he's ordered an aircraft carrier and a guided missile strike group to the Middle East as tensions soar with Iran. That was on the 25th of January. We do know, anecdotally, and it's very, very difficult to know, Iran continues to be in an internet shutdown, but there have been at least 20,000 killed in state reprisals in Iran since. After a detailed meeting and discussions in Geneva on Friday, 25 members of the United Nations Human Rights Council voted in favour of a censure resolution, I should say. Well, that's hardly going to pull up the mullahs, but I guess it's symbolic. But what happens there, Jack?
I don't think we know. The strike forces in the area now, they've shifted. I believe they've shifted anti-aircraft, anti-missile defences into Saudi, Yemen, the Gulf states, Jordan, and bumped up the number of jets, both US and European planes in the area. And I guess the pressure's on Iran now. What's their next move?
Meanwhile,
the Israeli Prime Minister and the leaders of the Gulf Arabs.
So please don't do this right now.
Talked President Trump out of an earlier strike, but now that all the defences have been stepped up, I think it'd be a brave person who would say, we know for sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, so Netanyahu requested Trump not to intervene, as did Qatar, I think is the right pronunciation. Saudi Arabia, Oman and Egypt, all partners of Washington, have also been asking the Trump administration not to attack Iran. Said no, and Jack, one of those things to watch would be the price of oil around the world, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah. Although that's sort of guesswork on the part of the market. I mean, it depends what time. It really depends upon the reaction of the leadership in Iran and what the US and its friends do next.
And meanwhile, the son of Iran's president has called for the internet restrictions in the country to be lifted, estimated to be coming back in March, as the last I heard, saying nothing. This is the son of Iran's president, that is Youssef Pezeshkian, which is an Armenian name, I would have thought. He said that the internet restrictions, nothing will be solved by trying to postpone the moment when pictures and videos circulate of the protests that were violently crushed by the regime. That is another thing, Jack. That's basically another thing that will surface in weeks and months to come. Just how bloody the reprisals have been.
Yes, I don't think anyone knows really for sure just how bad they've been. There are certainly reports that
not less in Iran
that the supreme leader has disappeared from public life, so to speak, and that he has been pushing for his son to do the public performance, etc. So okay. We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. Yeah, it's all very murky, indeed.
And it's just one of those things that because there is no internet access and not much communication, There's a lot of rumour and
A lot
conjecture,
of gossip. Yeah, a lot of gossip that we can't say has any veracity.
but not gossip. You can check and make sure you're right. Yeah.
Now, this story caught my eye and probably caught yours too, Jack, that Labor's national executive has blocked Andy Burnham's request to seek pre-selection, I guess we would call that in this country, for the Gorton and Denton by-election. Now, for listeners who don't know who Andy Burnham is, he's the current mayor of Greater Manchester.
And a former MP as well.
A former minister in the Blair government and I think the Brown government. He left the Parliament to take up the position of Mayor of Manchester. He's been quite successful there, Jack. Some very good and solid public transport reforms and things. Anyway, he looks like a very capable bloke. He's from the left, but a pretty smart bloke. And they've counted him out. And he hasn't had too much to say about it, Jack, but it just looks like they are feathering the nest of Sir Keir Starmer.
He had a little bit to say about it yesterday. Look, it's a mess.
Terrible.
He was blocked supposedly because that would be bad for Manchester, and the Labor Party didn't want that. But
that's the justification, was it?
Yeah. Look, the justification was paper thin, right? Transparently thin. It was an attempt to keep him because he is seen as a potential challenger to Starmer, and he was,
I think, a shadow minister in the Corbyn opposition. For a brief period. I think he had a falling out with Corbyn.
The only person on the NEC who voted for him to be allowed to be a candidate for pre-selection was the deputy leader of the Labor Party, Lucy Powell, who is an ally of his. So that's an indication of the degree of support he's got, is that she really ran as a Andy Burnham surrogate in the ballot for the election of the deputy leader, and she won. So he's clearly got a fair bit of backing within the parliamentary and wider party, and this was just a fairly blatant move by Starmer to prevent an opposing candidate getting into the parliamentary party.
Well, you know, all the sort of political shenanigans aside, what this does is actually reduce the government's talent pool by not having him in there. I mean, he's a guy who's got political experience as a minister, experience as a public administrator in Greater Manchester, and a job which, as we said, he's done pretty effectively from all reports. And just keep him out of the House of Commons because he might come looking for the Prime Minister one day.
Yes.
Hard to see any other reason for it.
No, and I don't think it's you come looking for him one day. It's that you come looking for him pretty quickly.
Well, he did say of Sir Keir Starmer, he thought Mrs. Burnham said of Sir Keir Starmer, albeit some years ago, that he thought he was a wonderful politician, very capable, very talented, very bright. I think most of us thought that too. And it's just when he's got into government that he's struggled. They have had to deal with sort of residual problems, Brexit being one, but also, you know, the enormous debt that's been racked up in the Tory government, Tory government's 10 years in power. There's a lot of problems there, but I think the way they're going about fixing it is really not the right way. But they've got the massive structural problem.
It's a government with 17% support.
Yeah, at this stage, that seems to be about right. I mean, they're climbing into the small 20s, and Lawrence, our listener, reminded us that Reform has come down from mid-30s down into the high 20s. So some of that's spread around, some of that's gone to the Tories, and some of that's gone to Labor. Meanwhile,
for as long as polling's been done in the UK, there has never been a less popular Prime Minister.
Yeah, even Boris Johnson. Liz
she
wasn't there long enough to have a poll about it.
No, From Andy Burnham's point of view, he would be pushing at an open door if he wanted the job.
Look, just politics aside, be keeping a very talented person who should be in government out of government. Yeah. All right, moving on. Japan will have a snap election after the country's Prime Minister Sane Takaichi dissolved Parliament just 3 months into government. She's a hardline conservative. She calls Thatcher one of her great role models, Jack. But as we mentioned before, there was a run on bonds in Japan. Now, one of the things that Takaichi has done is essentially provided a stimulus package for the Japanese economy. That's probably the best way to describe it. And I think all it did was sort of force the markets to look at the underlying fundamentals of the Japanese economy, and they're not flash. So that was a reason for a bit of a run on the run on their markets. This is from Axios, Jack. I think you've got that in front of you. Japan has played an outsized role in the global financial system over the last 2 decades with its massive pile of low-interest debt. Those underpinnings are now coming into question. Should they unravel more fully, it could throttle capital inflows to the rest of the world and therefore lower asset values and lift long-term rates. It raises the prospect of a world where bond investors are more jittery about buying the debt of countries with large ongoing fiscal debts, like Australia, like the United States, etc. The yen soared 1.2% against the US dollar overnight. That was last week, following a steep sell-off last week as traders saw hints that a government intervention to prop up the currency could be imminent. We will take all necessary measures to address speculative and highly abnormal movements, Japanese finance ministry official Tsushi Mimura said Sunday per Bloomberg. It comes after a week of wild gyrations in both currency and longer-term Japanese bonds, which sold off sharply last Monday and Tuesday, pushing borrowing rates sharply higher with spillover effects to the United States. If you had told me, I would have thought, gee, this has got a bit of the Liz Trusses about it, hasn't it?
Yes, she's got a 70% approval rate at the moment.
Yeah,
which is why she's going for an early election. What's it? February 8th.
Might not last terribly long, Jack. It does have a bit of the Liz Trusses about, a bit of government intervention that just went horribly wrong, and she's likely to be re-elected, as you say, and then the job gets a bit harder.
I don't think Liz Truss ever had a 70% approval rating.
I don't think she had a 7% approval rating, Jack.
Okay, yeah. She's had a look at it and said, well, 70%, why don't they go to an election?
Yeah, because that ain't going to last. All right, sport. The BBL has been run and done and won by the Perth Scorchers. I think their 6th title. And it was played, the Sixers were fielding while the Scorchers were batting, with Mitch Marsh banging it about a bit, in quite heavy rain. Steve Smith was far from happy and said, look, I played in rain before, but nothing like this. He said it was the wettest he'd ever played in.
It looked a bit of a farce to me on the television.
It was a farce. And there's not a lot they can do about it. But one thing they need to correct, Jack, is you had the Sydney Sixers essentially having 48 hours to get to Perth after they won a semi-final. That's just not long enough, particularly a long haul across the nation.
Yeah,
and they didn't even have a chance to have a run on the ground before, and the fielding drills and things like that. So that's something that needs to be fixed.
After what's been a good tournament, it was a very lame and limp finish.
Final series too, not just the final, but some of the finals were, I think T20 when it's one-sided, it becomes a very hard game to watch.
And what happened down in Hobart? Didn't they get rained out down there as well?
No, they played through the rain there, and I think that was by general agreement. The umpires sort of waved away some of the concerns. But I don't think there were any issues. They would swap the ball every over, and and there were no particular issues with player safety. And that's essentially why you go off for rain. The ball, condition of the ball, can't swap it every over in a test match, and also whether the players can keep their feet.
And to make it as much as possible an even playing field for the two teams as they bat,
rather
bat
than
the ball. But to me, it just looked like a bit of a schmozzle at the end, and like I say, a bit limp and a bit lame. And that's not well organised when you do that.
No. And again, there's talk of selling the thing off, Jack. And I don't know. In Cricket Australia, they've got, I think you said last week, they're starting to have the old ARU's capacity of just throwing money out the window. Moving on, a good article in the Sydney Morning Herald today, Jack. I recommend you have a read of it if you haven't looked at it so far. This is Greg Chappell talking about the future of Australian cricket. There wouldn't be too many people more qualified to talk about it. He mentions, in terms of quick bowlers, Callum Vidler, Marley Beardman, who played in the Scorchers game. I think Vidler's now, if he's not playing in Queensland, he's playing in Tasmania. Marley Beardman was a Scorchers, bowls quick, young bloke. Tom Straker and Charlie Anderson are names to watch, he says. He mentions, he said, of the batting stocks, is led by Sam Constas, who is still considered a long-term prospect. He says he's going about things the right way, according to Gregory Stephen Chappell. Cooper Connolly is a young batting all-rounder. He's not far away from Test selection, Cooper Connolly, particularly, against the Bangladesh and what have you. He'll get a Guernsey there. He's a very good player. Left arm spin, bats really well. Another member of the Scorchers BBL Premiership. Campbell Kellaway gets a mention, the tall left-handed opener. Some people, he says, are reminded of a young Bill Lawry, others of a young Matthew Hayden. And he mentions that the standout, probably, if all goes well, going to be a great Australian cricketer for 10 or 15 years. That's Oliver Peake, who's currently the captain of the Australian under-19 side. William Saltzman. The spinner stuff is a little bit light. Chappell talks about Todd Murphy being the one to replace Nathan Lyon, with Corey Rocchiccioli being the wonderfully named Corey Rocchiccioli being his next sort of competitor. And Tanvir Sangha as regarded as the best young leg spin option in the country. But Greg goes on to talk about how leg spin is not working terribly well in Australia at the moment with drop-in pitches. It's, fully grassed and all that sort of stuff. Very hard to get the ball to turn. And he said Shane Warne would be fulminating in the afterlife. So all looking pretty good, except for our spin. With the possibility of our spin, young spinners coming through.
Yeah, inevitably in the post-Warne era, until Lyon came along, the problem was every spinner was facing that. Well, you're not Shane Warne.
We've got some decent leggies, but they've found their way in. They're playing Shield cricket, but then they're going playing. Caribbean Premier League, Pakistan Premier League, these sorts of things. People like
it suits them.
Yeah. Anyway, so but yeah, look, you look across, and there's a few other names I could throw in there that have sort of caught my eye. But the future of Australian cricket looks pretty strong. Premier League, we started touching on last week because it's getting very close now. And Arsenal with last week with a 7-point lead, has now gone down to 4. They lost to Man U. Was it 3-2 in the end?
I was talking to a good friend who's a Liverpool fan. I said, what did you think about that? Because you'd be a bit torn. He said, oh, yeah. I said, I don't like Man U winning, but I don't mind Arsenal losing. The other thing is, he says, they'll probably appoint this bloke as coach, and that would be good for Liverpool. The last coach was going so bad. You know how you get a bit of a bump sometimes when you get rid of a coach who's lost
a bit
the
more
players.
than that, though. It's been a bit more than that.
And they also went back to a more old traditional Man U set up a way of playing. So it had an immediate effect. But how much of that
Well,
sugar hit?
they beat Man City in the derby last week and beaten league leaders, Arsenal. The question is, and I've got a number of mates, and one very good mate is an Arsenal barracker, and they do run out of steam. They've got a bit of a habit of running out of steam.
They do.
Get hunted down. I hope they get the win. Just for my mate's sake, really. In the Oz Open, Jack, tell me about the Jannik Sinner controversy. Is it a controversy? You tell me.
It isn't. It isn't and isn't. I think it was 2 days ago. Very, very hot, playing outdoors, roof open. And the rules say that the roof stays open until the heat index hits 5, right? The heat index is...
They don't use Celsius,
No, it's one of those calculated things, right?
Yeah.
We have them on our phone here for the summer. It's called Feels Like, they call it here.
Oh, right, okay. I know what you're talking about, yeah.
And he was cooked. I've got to tell you, he was absolutely cooked. He could hardly walk, and it's 1 set all. The other bloke's gone 3 games to 1 up, and they said, that's it, 5. We're going to close the roof, turn the air conditioning on, and come back. And Sinner won pretty comfortably. So it looked terrible, but and there are all sorts of accusations. There was saying Darren Cale, Sinner's coach, spoke to Craig Tilley, the tournament director. I actually watched the video of that. It's one bloke running along after Tilley, trying to have a word in his ear, as you would as his coach, but nothing to it,
And it looks to be like it's set up for another Djokovic title. It just seems like it's just playing his way.
Well, he had a walkover in the 4th round. His opponent pulled out injured, so he's not getting much of a workout. There's a new young bloke from the United States, Tien, who's a 19-year-old.
Chinese name? Tien?
Yeah. And he's got Michael Chang in his corner.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And you remember Michael Chang? He won he won the French Open.
I was going to say US Open, but obviously no.
But his first big victory was the French Open, and he jumped onto the microphone afterward and thanked his Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ, etc., all the usual stuff. And a few weeks later, he goes out in the first round at Wimbledon, right? And one of the sports commentators said, "Well, I don't think Jesus Christ helped him much, but you got to think Jesus Christ is probably going to be a clay court rather than a grass court."
Yeah. Oh, as if our Lord and Saviour is. Just keep an eye on the tennis. I've got a fair bit to get across, but I'll just pop over and watch the French Open.
By the way, the Sinner problem was really the clothes he's wearing. I don't know whether you've seen it. Let's have a look. The first time he appeared on court, someone's put up on the social media a photo of him saying, "Don't worry, Yannick, we will get the people who did this to you."
All right. Well, that takes us out. Been absolutely stinking hot in southern Australia. We had a bit of a heat wave here in New South, of course, but nothing like the Victorians and the South Australians have had to deal with, and of course fires raging throughout Victoria at the moment. So very messy for the tennis, but also profoundly concerning for those around the Otways and what they're calling the Gellibrand region, Jack, but down sort of Port Arlington way.
Yes.
Big fires burning there too. So we wish everyone to hope everyone stays safe and get a bit of a weather change and give our fireys a bit of a break. All right. Well, that takes us out for our episode.
I've just got one thing I found. One thing I found out yesterday. Did you know that Casablanca, the movie, was banned in Ireland?
A lot of things were banned in Ireland, Jack. I'm not quite sure.
This one was banned for first time in 19 when it was released. It was not sufficiently neutral. That is, that it was not kind enough to the Nazis.
Not kind enough to the Nazis.
The Nazis, yes.
Didn't give them. Didn't allow them to make a comment. Lots of look. I wrote about this recently in Australia. With Lady Chatterley's Lover was D.H. Lawrence's book. Was banned in Australia for 40 years, well, nearly 40 years. from publication date onwards. There's a long list of books that were banned in Australia that you look at and go, what? Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, all cut out. There's nothing to do with the sort of prurience of some of these novels. More about, these are dangerous ideas, and we don't want Australians turning their minds to them. All right, well, that does take us out. Finally, we hope you've enjoyed listening to us, and please drop us a line if you want to comment, particularly around Australia Day. I'd love to hear from you there, and we'd also, on the date, what your view about that is, and also Brexit. We'd love to hear you talk about Brexit as well. But there's anything's available, if it's a comment, criticism, or whatever. We do apologise. We're just hearing some construction noise back there. We do apologise. Earlier in the show, there was a bit of drilling, bit of banging going on. Unfortunately, there's 3 stories above Jack and his residence in Hong Kong. Yes, they are up and about again, Jack, but
They are.
they've made it we've made it to the end anyway. So, look, drop us a line. You know how to get hold of us. And we'll give you a run on the show. All right, thanks for listening, and we'll talk next week. See ya.